Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week we're bringing you some clips from earlier episodes. It's a collection of some different interviews and highlights to share. From cassowaries to golden-cheeked warblers, from European goldfinches to the Christmas bird count. We think you'll enjoy these highlights and hopefully be encouraged to share these episodes with someone who would enjoy them or go back and give them another listen. We'll be back next week with our regular format, but wanted to share this in the meantime because it's fun. Okay, go grab your binoculars and let's get into it. This is from Jack Turner, aka Jack Wildlife, telling us about his trip to Austin, Texas to see the endangered golden-cheeked warbler. This is from episode 48. I know you went to see the golden-cheeked warbler recently, if you wanted to talk about that at all. Otherwise, we have a couple meme ideas we wanted to pitch to you. We can jump into that.
Heck yeah. Yeah, so my partner she's a birder, but not by trade. She is like a casual birder. So whenever we travel, it's never to go birding when we travel. But we did go to see, in April, we went to see the total solar eclipse, which had the path of totality along, the kind of the center of the country. And so we flew into Austin, and I see anytime we travel as an opportunity to bird and to find new birds to add to my life list. And it's just a fun thing to do. You can, like Shannon was saying, you can bird anywhere. So no matter where we go, I always have there's a park nearby or there's somewhere to go birding. And so flying into Austin was no different, because in central Texas and hill country is what they call it, is the breeding populations of the golden-cheeked warbler. And from what I understand, and I haven't studied golden-cheeked warblers by any means, but they only breed in central Texas. And because of the amount of development from ranches and housing and all of our development activities, it's really destroyed and taken away removed a lot of their habitat for the golden-cheeked warbler. And they need this, I think it's like a grubby cedar kind of tree. They use the bark from the cedar in their nests, and something about a very specific type of ecology they need for their nesting and breeding habitat. And so they've become an endangered species. And in central Texas, they're very protected. And so we went, and of course I jump onto eBird and I punch in golden-cheeked warbler. It sometimes feels like cheating, you go on eBird and you look up what birds have been seen near you recently. It's like, I should just go out and find it myself. But I punched in golden-cheeked warbler and I had a couple hits within 10, 15 miles of us. And so we jumped in the car and drove over to this park. We heard it, 30 feet away from us up in a tree. My partner and I looked at each other, and the amount of energy and excitement shared between us in that moment was, we could have powered a small community for a year with the amount of electricity that we just had. I've got goosebumps just thinking about this moment. So I've got my camera. It's super hot. It was like 90 degrees. It's super humid and just wet. And fiance is standing there. She's excited. She's taking pictures on her phone. I've got my camera. We amassed. It was like the disciples of golden-cheeked warblers. Everybody on the trail was stopping because the amount of excitement we had was infectious. And everybody's like, "What are you looking at?" And I'm like, "Well, my friend, that right there, you see that bird?" They're like, "Yeah, well, that's a cool bird." I said, "You're damn right that's a cool bird." That is the golden-cheeked warbler, my friend. And you are now an official birder. Get the Merlin app and plant some natives in your yard, and I'll see you later. And so it was just great. We had this group. There's like 15 people standing around us on this trail, and they wanted to see the photos I took, and they wanted to know why the bird was special. So that was a very cool, a very notable sighting.
This next piece is when we talk to the host of Tooth and Claw, Wes Larson. Wes went to Australia to see cassowaries. This is from our episode number 41, if you want to hear more.
So you went to Australia and went out to see cassowaries. That makes you much better off to talk about this than any one of the four of us. Tell us a little bit about that trip.
I disagree with you, but I will talk to you about it. we went to Australia, and it was a family trip, but I was doing everything I could to sneak in as much wildlife as I could. So we saw a lot of the really iconic Australian species. Like we saw kangaroos, we saw koalas. We managed to go out and see great white sharks, which are maybe my favorite animal in the world. But the animal that I came back home thinking about was the cassowary. That was the one that I couldn't stop thinking about. I kept going back to my photos of it. And we were in Cairns, which is northern Queensland, and we had to get down to Townsville, and that takes you right along the Cassowary coast, and we were driving. And so I had done my research and looked at the hot spots for cassowaries. There's one called Eddy Bay, Etty, and it's kind of just like a little tiny town, and then there's an actual beach there. And that is the beach like that you go to. That is where you are supposed to see cassowaries. Everyone said it's almost a guaranteed sighting. So we went there at the right time of day, didn't see anything, didn't see any tracks. There was other people waiting. A woman there said they hadn't seen them for like a day and a half. So then we went to Mission Beach where we were staying, which was the second highest kind of concentration, but a much bigger area that you have to look through. And so I spent probably 8 or 9 hours driving around Mission Beach, looking at the internet, trying to find hot spots and just striking out, like not seeing them anywhere. Drove back to Eddy Bay the next morning, then drove back to Mission Beach and was about to give up. And then I realized there's a Facebook group of residents of Mission Beach that loved cassowaries. And I just wrote on there, I said, hey, I'm a traveling bear biologist. I really, really, really want to see a cassowary. Any advice you guys can give me would just be so helpful. And a couple of them commented and said, try, these spots. And they gave me 3 or 4 recommendations. And so on our drive out of town, on our way to Townsville, I said, can we just go by these spots? And by then my family was getting a little tired of looking for cassowaries, but they were like, fine, you can go. And as we were driving, and my brother said, we should drive up this little street. And I said, okay, let's do it. And we just caught the glimpse of this big black body in someone's front yard. These are really urbanized cassowaries in this area. They have some really good jungle, but then they also kind of hang out in people's landscaping, eating their fruits and stuff. Wow. And I think it was a male. I think it was a juvenile male, but just the brightly colored neck, the beautiful coloration on the face and the wattles. And for me, it felt like seeing a dinosaur. It was like seeing this animal walk out of this yard, and I was just entranced. And we followed it for a while, and it just didn't care about us and was feeding and foraging. And then we got back in the car, and as we were leaving town, a really big, beautiful female was on the edge of the forest. Oh. And we stopped, and I tried to get a photo of her, but she ducked right back in, which I was glad she did. It seemed like a much wilder experience, the second one. But yeah, I just couldn't stop thinking about him afterward. It felt again like seeing a true life dinosaur, and they definitely left a big impression on me.
Coming up next was a segment that we did on the Christmas bird count. Amanda and I knew about the count, but have not participated in one, so we wanted to get the full scoop from John. It was fun to hear about its origins, so hopefully this is meaningful to newer birders wanting to know more. This is from the intro of episode 26 on the mallard duck.
Yeah, well, it's this annual event that takes place coming on the run-up to Christmas and then into just past New Year's every year. And it was started in 1900 in New York City. And Frank Chapman, who was a curator of birds at the American Museum, basically wanted people to think about looking at birds as opposed to just killing them and putting them in hats at the time, which was something that was fairly prevalent. And it's evolved into this event that has thousands and thousands of participants across the U.S., Canada, and into Latin America, going out every year. And a circle is put on a map, and the one stipulation across the country is that circles don't overlap, so they can touch, but they aren't geographically overlapping. And they have a 15-mile diameter or radius. I can never remember which one, 15-mile radius, I think. And what people do is they go into those circles and count every single bird they can during the day.
And different counts, of course, are happening in all kinds of different geographies across the U.S. And I've been doing it, I realized, for 50 years since I was a kid growing up in Arizona, where I would do Christmas counts like Nogales, Arizona, where we would literally go through our area on the Nogales Christmas count, which included this count circle crossover into Mexico. And back then there was a barbed wire fence at the border that we could literally go under and go bird in Mexico if we wanted to for a little bit, and then come back and finish up the rest of our area. And it's all about wintering birds, and the way it's done is systematic enough that these data are actually useful to look at population trends of birds from a scientific perspective. So it's one of the first it's the first big example of citizen science in the U.S. birding community, really. And, so the predecessor of eBird and things, and it's a great tradition. And one of the big things to do is there's a compilation at the end of the day on many of the counts where everybody comes in and you get to find out what good birds people found in their area that they didn't expect. And so the count that I went on this year was up in Blanchardville, Wisconsin, which is one that Dave Willard, our retired collection manager, has been doing for over 50 years. He grew up as a young birder in Madison, Wisconsin. And we get together and we divide that circle up into 4 areas, and it's a bunch of farmland west of Madison. And we go out and we count birds. And the temperature this year when we started was 15 degrees, and it got up to about maybe 30 during the course of the day. So it was cold. And yet, there are birds there. And we saw things like pileated woodpeckers, which are resident there. But we also had northern shrikes there. We had birds like tufted titmouse, which is an interesting one because over the years that we've been doing the count, they didn't used to occur in the area, and they've gradually increased their range northward. And so you see all these interesting things associated with trends as you've gotten the chance to do that over time. And so it's a fun event, and there are lots of Christmas counts in the Chicago area, for instance, but anywhere you live, you could find a Christmas count within shouting distance of you that you could potentially go on. And it's run by the National Audubon Society.
We loved this next story from Jack Wildlife about a camera that he gifted to a young birder who was interested in bird photography. We thought the story was super touching and talked about what kind of powerful impact this can have on someone's future. This is also from episode 48 on ospreys with Jack Wildlife.
Last week on Wednesday, I did a presentation and short bird walk with a group of kids. They were 7 to 13 years old, boys and girls. And I had a short presentation where we did a lot of bird superlatives. I talked about the biggest bird in the Chesapeake Bay, the smallest bird, told them about what birds eat and why birds are important. So kind of getting them excited. And I was so impressed, this group of kids. 7-year-old, 8-year-old kids are telling me about their favorite birds, why the owl is their favorite bird, and how many birds they have in their yard, and how they help their mom fill up the hummingbird feeder. Wow. And it was just really interesting. And I absolutely agree with you. Looking for ways to connect with, underserved groups but the people who aren't either naturally drawn to birding or don't have the same sort of opportunities to connect with birds. I think bringing those opportunities to people is really, really important. It's certainly part of what I'm trying to do. And my second point there is I've made friends. A friend of mine who's my age, I'm 34, a friend of mine, her sister is 12 years old, and her sister is very interested in the environment and nature, and by default, kind of birds. She asked if we could go on a bird walk, if I could take her and her 12-year-old sister on a bird walk. I said, absolutely. I said, let's meet at the park. We'll go for a nice walk. Her sister shows up with her iPhone with this lens kind of like clipped onto it, like a zoom lens. And she's trying to take photos, and she was semi-successful, but it's a phone with the zoom lens like almost glued onto it. And we had a great time, and she was really interested in birds and very engaged and intuitive and thoughtful. And so I went out into my circle and I said, I want to get her a camera. She needs a real camera. It doesn't have to be a professional camera, but she needs a camera to take photos with. And I was able to source from someone I know a bridge camera, which is you can't change the lenses, but it zooms in, I think, like 50 times optical zoom. It's really good for beginning birding photography. And so I found a bridge camera that someone didn't use, and I explained to them what I was trying to do to encourage this young girl to continue to bird and get into photography and support her. And they said, "Oh, well, I was going to sell it, but I'd love to just, I'll just give you the camera and you can you can give it to her." So I coordinated with her parents to make sure that was okay to give her this camera. And we organized another bird walk at the park, and it was a surprise for her. And I almost going to get emotional talking about it because it was just such a cool moment to be able to gift her this camera. And we took a walk through the park and showed her how to use it and showed her how to transfer the photos onto her phone. And all of a sudden she's got eastern bluebird, indigo bunting, red-eyed vireo. She's got these photos on her phone that she just took with this camera, and you can just see the connections she's making happening. And I've talked to her parents a little bit since then, and they say she just takes the camera everywhere, and she's getting more bird feeders set up in their yard so she can take more photos. And so that's just one example, but I absolutely couldn't agree more.
It scales. She'll interact with every person she meets differently from that. And that is the way we're going to save the environment. It's that. It's not going to be people telling people what they have to do, because that never works. Anybody who is either was or has a kid knows you can't tell them what to do. It doesn't work. I hate being told what to do. But if you show people things and they get part of a network, they feel like they're part of a network, then there's something at stake for them, whether it's might not be their own personal environment, but the world becomes part of their network. And you want to save things that are part of your network. You want to honor things part of your network. And that scales. Network connections scale. So you're not giving a talk to 5,000 people at a commencement or anything like that. You're making a simple connection that then all those people connections are influenced by it. So it scales. So what you did changed the world. Even though it seems tiny, it's not tiny.
Next up is not about birds, but rather a part on bugs from when we talked to Maureen Turcatel from the Field Museum. We did a full episode on cicadas with her. This segment is from when she told us all about the bug collection at the Field Museum, though, as well as her specialty, horseflies. This is from episode 46. So Maureen, we've talked mostly about cicadas, but you're the collection manager of all insects at the Field Museum, is that right?
Yes.
So what
I
other...
love to brag. It's the largest collection at the Field Museum.
We'd love to hear a little bit more about that, some of the other insects. Yeah, anything you want to touch on that has been exciting this year that's been going on?
Yeah. So when I say it's the largest collection, it's in number of specimens. So we estimate that we have about 13 million. And that is a low estimate, to be honest. I don't think we'll ever know for sure how many specimens we have. But that's more or less what we have estimated. So for the bean collection, 5 million specimens. In alcohol, about 8 million. We have a lot of bulk samples, which are just with how they're called, bulk samples. They're jars that come from traps, and they can have hundreds or thousands of bugs. And in our collection, they count as one. And the strongest, the most represented taxon in our collection is Coleoptera, the beetles. So we have a very strong rove beetle collection, Staphylinids. And yeah, we have a lot of visitors and researchers, students that come and visit our collection or request material to study the specimens that are deposited there. This year, it's been mostly about the cicadas. So we are adding to our collection. We are collecting. We had some people, a lot of the press coming and wanting to see them and wanting to take pictures. We found some really cool stuff that we had no idea were there. Well, yeah, it's a very rich collection, and whenever I have the chance, I try to show people some flies because horse flies are a tough sell.
How did you? Dead ones are an easier sell than live ones. So.
Yeah. No, there are some that, they look very cool and there's a lot of diversity. There are 4,500 different species of horse flies, and that's usually what I tell people. Like, I try to make sense of why so many, how they're related to each other, how are they so successful, because they're pretty much everywhere. So, yeah.
How did you get interested in them?
So when I started college, I had no idea I was going to end up in entomology. I thought I was going to work with genetics until I took classes and realized it was basically statistics. So when I started the classes in invertebrate zoology, I really loved especially the lab part in which you basically look at stuff and draw them up. And a professor just said, well, that's basically what taxonomy is. You look at stuff, you draw them, you describe them, and you find new species. And I thought that was great. So he recommended me to go and talk to some professors in zoology, see if I could get an internship. And I ended up in the entomology department. And I remember the first time I saw the collection, I was just amazed. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I've never been to an entomological collection in my life. And I had no idea what I was going to do, what I was going to work with. So a friend of mine, she gave me the best advice ever. She was my senior, and she said, well, if you don't care, if you don't know what you're going to work with, then choose your mentor. And that was awesome because one of the professors that I really liked happened to work with flies. And then when we were trying to come up with what I was going to do, he said, well, there are a lot of groups that just need some work done. They need people because they're being understudied. And horseflies was one of them. And the only thing, I didn't want to tell him, but the only thing that I was hoping for was something big that I could see with the naked eye. So when he said horsefly, I said, yep, that works.
That works.
And they're really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about horseflies. So yeah, it was, and I started with alpha taxonomy, which is something that I really like to this day. It's hard to find the time because it takes, it's not something that it's fast to get the results. But I think that the coolest thing is when we find new species and get to describe them. That's my favorite thing.
So how many species of horseflies are there in Illinois?
In Illinois, that is a good question. I remember I looked for this number, but now I would say between 50 and 100 maybe. I'm not
That's
sure.
a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Between horseflies and deerflies, there's a lot of diversity, especially in the southern part of the state. So yeah, you can find a lot of good stuff around here.
So I just heard you mention deer flies. Are horseflies horseflies because they bother horses?
Kind of a misnomer.
Okay.
Because they are generalists. Like they're not going to feed only on horses. So basically it's any large mammal that they can, get the blood from. And only the females bite. So the males are going to be feeding on nectar and pollen. But yeah, for them, it doesn't really matter if it's a horse or
a human
deer
sleeping
or
in a
human or yeah.
Go right through
Dogs.
the
I've
Yeah.
definitely been bitten before. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are aggressive. And some, if they're especially hungry, they can bite you through your clothes. I've heard stories about some deer flies cutting through jeans pants, but I'm not sure.
That's awful.
But I also wouldn't be surprised.
Do they have some of the strongest mouth parts of insects?
They can be. I don't want to say the strongest in insects because there are some other insects that are there like cutting wood and
Yeah, fair.
yeah, but they basically they're very sharp, and that's why it's so painful because they have those two mandibles and they basically move them side to side, just lash your skin. And then they have some anticoagulants in their saliva and get the blood flowing. So it's not like a mosquito you only notice after you've been bitten and they've gone away because it's more like a hypodermic needle. and they have anesthetics in their saliva. So horseflies don't have anesthetics, just the anticoagulant. So they're just going to slash your skin open, put some anticoagulants, wait a bit for the blood to flow, and then they come back and lap it from the skin. Yeah.
I've always thought it's the most like painful thing to get bit by a horsefly, but now after hearing that description, like it's now that I can put a visual to it, it's even worse than I remember.
That is awful.
Yeah, no, it's very painful. There are some videos of some brave people who actually endure that to get like the action of how they open the slash on your skin, and they say like, yeah, it was hard to keep my hand like not moving while that was being
Yet
filmed.
another thing I wouldn't sign up for.
No, you're crazy. I'm not doing that on purpose.
Next is a conversation that we had with Louise Bodt on European goldfinches. Louise has been studying a population that has been living in the Midwest in the U.S., not Europe, and tells us about how they came to be here. This was a fantastic full episode if you haven't listened yet. It's episode 34. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about how they got here and where they are overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, there's a small population in Illinois, and I can tell you a little bit about my journey finding out about them, which kind of correlates with the actual event itself. So a lot of the information that we have on this population is from Julie Craves, who's another researcher, and so a lot of the digging into sort of their history in Illinois, in the Western Great Lakes region, is all work that she's done combing through a lot of records. So I have to give her a shout out because she's done a lot of work. And so I kind of didn't know exactly what I wanted to study, but I knew I was interested in studying introduced birds. And I knew I was moving to Chicago. And so I kind of randomly stumbled across Julie's webpage asking for people to send in sightings of European goldfinches around the Chicago area, Illinois, Wisconsin area. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. That's really close to where I'm about to move. And so, you know, I read her whole paper that she published in 2008, which was sort of a status update on this bird that she had asked people to send in records of. And so in her digging, she found out that they were introduced by a bird importer who basically, you know, was selling birds for the pet trade. Lots of different birds, not just European goldfinches. But around 2001, it seems to correlate with a avian influenza outbreak and some fears about importing birds. All of a sudden, there were a ton of records from all around McHenry County and Lake County, Illinois.
And was that legal to be trading birds like that, or is that frowned upon?
They're a pretty common bird in the pet trade, it turns out.
Okay.
And so actually that's an interesting thing where they show up at Montrose on a semi-occasional basis.
Oh, wow.
And they're almost all escapees from Chicago, from somebody's individual bird getting out.
I don't know. This thing seems a little dodgy.
Yeah,
to me.
Yeah, I don't know if he... It might have been legal because I know there are import records.
Oh, okay.
But how much is transparent? I don't know.
I mean,
Totally.
Where are these birds actually from, right? So there's no way of checking that when he says they're from X, Y, or Z place, that's where they're actually.
Okay.
And he was...
And now Louise will figure that out.
Sure. And he was not just... He didn't just have European goldfinches. He had greenfinches, which he had a bunch of different European species.
Okay.
And all the others have had this little peak of period of time right after they were released where they were around and then they disappeared.
Oh,
okay.
And the goldfinches have persisted. And it's become a really interesting story up in Lake County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he purposely release them, or was it a mistake? Or
It's unclear.
Okay.
There's a couple of ideas of what happened. One is because of the avian influenza, he released them to avoid the imported birds like passing around the flu. Another idea is that he was just an irresponsible person, just release them. But I think those are kind of like the main thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really a concrete answer.
Sure.
Okay.
Apparently, he had a lot of birds in his aviaries that he had around his house.
Is there any idea like how many it started with, like when they were all released, or is that too hard to
I
know?
don't think Julie came across. I know she has like numbers of records from like the bird import. I think in past years it was something like 9,000 European goldfinches per year or something, and then after some of these events have taken place, like it dipped down to like below 1,000 a year. And I don't know the dates and timing for all of those, but I know that there are import records for a lot of them, but I don't know if we really know like how many were released. But the area where they were spotted in the very early days after that was very wide ranging, whereas now they're very concentrated along like some of the places where we look for them in Lake County.
If it weren't for Louise, I would not know this bird existed around here. You know of them in the pet trade, but the idea that there's a breeding population of those in Illinois, and I could live here for 25 years and not have ever heard of them, is bizarre.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Those were clips from episodes 48, 41, 26, 46, and 34 if you want to go back and listen. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes, but just wanted to give a little recap of some of our previous episodes. If you have a question for us, you can reach us at podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please leave us a review and rating in your podcast app. Thanks to Earhole Studios in Chicago for helping us record, and we'll see everybody next week. Love you all.